My insane ex-wife manipulated the legal system and got me wrongfully sentenced to prison. So after getting out I got her evicted. The reason I ruined my ex-wife's life starts at the time of our divorce. She falsely reported me for being violent, then coerced her sister into testifying on her behalf, and thus got a restraining order against me as well as full custody of our kids. That was already a hard blow. But what came next was the knockout blow for me. My mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer and was told she had 3 months to live, and her dying wish was to have her grandkids visit her in the hospital so she could see them one last time. So I violated the restraining order and contacted my ex. I promised that I wouldn't be in the room with them, and that all I ask is for her to let our kids see their dying grandmother one last time. She laughed at me in response, then said that not only would she not let the kids visit, but that she won't even take them to the funeral. Turns out, she also went to the police and reported me for violating the restraining order. I ended up being arrested, and although the judge said he understood why I did it, he still ruled it as a breach of the restraining order and sentenced me to 4 months in jail. My mother passed away while I was locked up, and I never even got to say goodbye. But when I got out of jail, I was a different person. That anger I felt was all I could think about. I didn't care about right or wrong anymore. I just wanted to hurt my ex-wife, Laura, the way she'd hurt me. I knew I couldn't go near her, not with the restraining order and all, but that didn't mean I couldn't ruin her life from a distance. The anger that I felt in my cell was replaced with emptiness. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Most of my family had written me off long before I ever got locked up. They didn't even call when mom passed. They just let me be in that cell. I had no choice but to start over, but it wasn't as easy as it sounded. I had no job, no home, no money, just a criminal record and hatred for the woman who had put me there. Eventually, I found a rundown apartment complex on the edge of town, but it was cheap, and that was all I could afford. I paid the first month's rent with what little cash I had left, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. The apartment was a dump, but it was a roof over my head. The ceiling leaked and the heating barely worked, but it was something. I spent the first night there on the floor, staring up at the cracked ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. The next day, I went out looking for a job. I needed money if I was going to survive and, more importantly, if I was going to get back at Laura. But finding work with a record wasn't easy. I spent hours going from place to place, asking for applications, and filling out forms only to get turned away as soon as they saw the gap in my employment history. Finally, I found a convenience store that was desperate enough to take me on. It wasn't much, just minimum wage, but it was something and I took it. The work was mind-numbing. I spent my days behind the counter, ringing up smokes and lottery tickets. The nights were worse, with drunks stumbling in at all hours and the occasional junkie trying to boost a six-pack. The whole time, I kept thinking about Laura, about how she was out there somewhere, living her life while I was stuck in this pit. Every cent I earned went towards keeping the crappy apartment and buying just enough food to get by. There was no room for anything else. But every night, after I'd dragged myself back to that dump of an apartment, I'd lie there and think about what I was going to do to her, how I was going to make her pay for what she'd done to me and my mom. When I finally got to a decent place and wasn't struggling as badly with keeping my finances, my plan to destroy Laura started coming into full effect. The first thing I did was find out where she was working. It took some digging, but eventually I found out she was managing a little boutique downtown. It seemed like a cozy job. What a shame it would be if someone were to get her fired, I thought to myself. I figured it was the perfect place to start. I found this raggedy computer from a pawn shop and bought it. When I got home I sat in front of my computer and created a bunch of fake online profiles. It felt like hours had passed since I started this, but I wasn't even close to being done. This was the 4th profile today, but it had to be different from the others. Each profile needed its own personality. This wasn't something I could just throw together. I had to be concise. I had to be convincing. I filled in every detail, including names, birthdays, hobbies and even a few photos I'd pulled from some random corners of the internet. The first one was easy. A middle-aged woman who loved floral patterns and had a soft spot for her golden retriever. She was the type who'd frequent Laura's boutique, who'd be devastated if the customer service didn't meet her high standards. The second profile was a younger guy, tech-savvy, and quick to post a review if something ticked him off. He had a poor temper. He'd be the kind of customer who noticed every little thing and had no problem calling out bad service when he saw it. The third one? An older man, the grumpy type who was impossible to please but whose words carried weight because of his age as well as the fact he was an army veteran. Not a good look to be rude to him. These people all needed to be real, at least on the surface, so no one would ever question the stories I was about to tell. As I moved on to writing the fake reviews, I could feel my anger building up again. The thought of Laura sitting comfortably in that boutique, living her life like nothing had happened made my blood boil. My mother's voice echoed in my head. Her final wish was replaying in my head over and over. And the thought of Laura reporting me to the cops like I was nothing broke my heart. I wasn't even worth giving my dying mother a last moment of happiness. I started typing the first review, keeping it simple, just a comment about a rude remark she'd made to a customer. But that alone wasn't enough. I needed to do more, to make her feel the way I had felt in that jail cell, knowing my mother had passed away alone because of her and her psychopathy. The next review was worse. I made up stories of her snapping at customers, making them feel unwelcome, and even insulting them under her breath. It felt good, like I was finally getting back at her. It didn't matter how long it took or how many reviews I had to write. I wouldn't stop until I knew that Laura was suffering. By the time I finished, my eyes were burning from staring at the screen for so long. But I didn't care. I leaned back in my chair and felt a grim satisfaction. Over time, the complaints started to add up. The boutique's owner eventually couldn't ignore the sheer amount of complaints I had submitted. Every single day, new profiles, new fake reviews. The owner launched an investigation into Laura's behavior. Of course Laura denied everything. She was in the right after all, but the damage was already done. The owner couldn't take the risk of losing customers because of a problem employee, so she fired Laura. I found out through a friend who I asked to walk in and ask specifically for Laura. The first step to ruining her life was complete. I felt a sick sense of satisfaction when I heard the news. Laura had taken my mom's last wish away from her, so I took Laura's job away from her. but that was just the beginning. Next I turned my attention to her house. It was the house we had bought together back when we were still married when things were good. The thought of her losing it filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction. I started digging through public records, looking for anything that could cause her problems. After a few days of searching, I hit the jackpot. Laura was behind on her property taxes. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to cause issues if someone brought it to the right attention, and the person handling her case had the right incentive. So I did just that. I acted like I was a concerned neighbor and sent an anonymous tip to the city, saying that the house might be abandoned or poorly maintained. This made them schedule an inspection, and sure enough they found a few minor code violations. This was nothing serious but enough to violate her HOA and make life difficult for her. But I wasn't done yet. I had an old friend from high school who worked as a code enforcement officer. We hadn't talked in years, but I reached out to him, reminded him of the good old days, and then slipped him a bribe to expedite the process. Soon enough, Laura got an eviction notice due to the unpaid taxes and the code violations. She was given a short time to vacate the house. I imagined her panic when she received that notice. She had nowhere to go. She had lost her job, and now she was losing her home. It felt like everything was falling into place, just the way I wanted. With Laura jobless and homeless, I knew I had the upper hand. I wanted the kids. I loved them and would have loved to be there with them after the divorce. But I had to be careful. My parole officer would have loved an excuse to throw me back in jail. I couldn't make direct contact with her, so I thought long and hard about how I could strategically gain custody. Eventually, I decided on to use my sister as a go-between. She was hesitant at first. She was the one family member who hadn't kicked me to the curb, and I'm forever appreciative of that. She's a good person, and she didn't want to get involved in something that could land her in trouble. But I convinced her that I was just trying to do what was best for the kids. With her help, I petitioned for custody. I hired a top-notch lawyer, one who knew how to spin a story in court. We argued that Laura was unfit to care for the kids due to her unstable living situation and lack of income. My lawyer painted me as a reformed man, someone who had made mistakes in the past but had learned from them. He emphasized that I had a stable job and a decent home and was ready to be the father my kids needed. The courtroom was tense, but I knew I had this in the bag. Laura was on the other side, looking all worn out and desperate. She had tried to fight back. She gave every sob story she could to the judge, talking about how she lost her job and got evicted, trying to make me out to be some kind of monster who was out to ruin her life. But I kept my cool. She might have tried to paint me as the bad guy, but I wasn't the one who showed up looking like I couldn't take care of my own kids. I had a job and a place to live, and I'd spent the last few months getting my act together. Laura was practically begging the judge to believe her, but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't buying it. The judge didn't care about her excuses or her claiming that I was behind everything that had gone wrong in her life. What mattered to him was the facts. I had a stable income and a decent home, and she was homeless and jobless. He granted me full custody of the kids. Laura nearly crumbled right there. I felt a sick satisfaction watching her break like that. And now, with the kids living under my roof, she's left with nothing but the memories of how good things used to be. I'll admit part of me felt a little empty after it was all done. I thought winning would fill that void somehow, but watching her lose everything still felt damn good. The first few weeks with the kids were strange. I thought that getting them back would make everything better, but instead, it made things worse. Emily and Jacob were distant. They didn't trust me. They missed their mom, and it was clear that no matter how hard I tried, they wouldn't stop asking about her. It took a lot of time for me to get to know them, and I really did try. Eventually, I realized that it was incredibly selfish and petty of me to deny them contact with her mother. By doing so, I would have become everything Laura was, and I hated her. I didn't want to hate myself. I got my sister to reach out to Laura and tell her about my proposal, which was that the kids can visit her on the weekends. Just because I didn't want to speak to my ex-wife, didn't mean my kids shouldn't have a mother. She did love them after all. Eventually, we managed to reach a nice middle ground. The kids really liked their mom, and to be honest, I was glad they did. I want them to grow up in an environment as stable as possible given everything that has happened. Laura and I even met each other once, saying hi to each other when I dropped the kids off to hers. I have no interest in ever getting back with her, but if I managed to develop a nice co-parent relationship, I would not be mad.